Welcome to Drinks in the Library, the only library where drinks aren't just allowed, they are required. I'm your librarian host, Gigi Howard, and each episode I'll be interviewing a guest about a much-loved book that we will be pairing with a drink for you to enjoy along with us or consider for your next book club meetup. As always, stay curious and support your local library. Hello, listeners. I wanted to let you know that during the holiday season, I'm going to be taking a little bit of a pause in all the editing and content creation that goes into making this podcast, and I'm going to be releasing podcasts on an every other week schedule. So that is between now and early January. Also, today's episode is an older episode that I released a few months ago, so it is a re-release. I hope you enjoy it and understand we're going into the holiday season. It's also Sagittarius season, which in my house means a lot of birthday parties and parties in general and traveling. So I hope you understand just for my own mental health. With that being said, I wish you all a wonderful, happy, safe Thanksgiving. Thanks. Hello, Libration Nation. This week I'm back with a guest who is me. This is something I had thought about for a while. I had wanted to talk about Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, which is one of my favorite books by her, and her writing has had a big influence on me the last handful of years of my life, and I also connect a lot of this book with lessons I've learned doing this podcast, which has been a journey in and of itself. And I want to thank my husband, Bill, for being our host this week and being an excellent host, I might add. We're definitely going to see some more of him in the future for sure. And our drink this week is called a GigiRita, which is just a margarita with Grand Marnier. I am a ridiculous person. And when I'm at home with friends making drinks, sometimes I just make up names and add my name to it or somebody else's name. So just because I'm super silly. So I hope you enjoy this episode. It was a great time recording, and I am so glad to be back with y'all.
Well, hello, Libration Nation. Welcome to this week's Drink in the Library, hosted by Bill, husband of Gigi, unofficial bar backer of the show, and oh, how the turntables. I'll be interviewing Gigi herself for her book of the week, Bird by Bird. With that, might be a few different questions than you're used to. Gigi, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
I'm so glad someone finally asked. So, I am a library manager. I have been in libraries for 13 years. I'm also married to you.
Indeed. That's a good lead-in for my first question.
Oh.
You have a husband who intentionally hides himself on the internet. How does it feel to drop little tidbits about him without his knowing on a weekly basis?
It feels good. I don't know what else to tell you about that. I mean, I think it speaks to the solidness of our relationship that you are so intertwined in my life that you regularly get brought up on this podcast. You also know some of the guests that have been on, so I mean, it's sort of natural.
Yeah, it's been rather nice actually to get a hang with a lot of people I like on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
So I have gone through my first two questions of who do you think you are and how dare you. I think we can probably go into the normal run of questions here for the show. So tell me, who were you when you first read this book, Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott?
Okay. Yes, I definitely we're going to jump into the book. Do you want to bring up the drink real quick, or is that for later?
Oh, we should bring up the drink. It's a beautiful concoction my guest has brought. Around our house, we call it a GigiRita. Gigi, would you like to explain what a GigiRita is?
A GigiRita is, I mean, for the layman, it is a normal margarita with Grand Marnier, which is, tequila, Grand Marnier, simple syrup, and lime juice. Now, do I sometimes take drinks other people have made and put my name on them? So, occasionally, a couple times a year. But yeah, the GigiRita is just, our house margarita, and it's delicious.
And how would you say this pairs with the book?
How does it pair with the book Bird by Bird? I would say Bird by Bird is one of my house favorites. As a librarian, I always recommend it. And when you come to my house, you probably get an option to have a GigiRita if you want one. So
I think that makes sense. I personally, without hearing your reasoning behind it, thought it fits because, the book is about telling stories and making them your own. And that's what stories are, right? They're somewhat derivative, but it's part of touching base with a cultural background, and you make it part of yourself. And you have taken the Grand Marnier margarita and really made it part of yourself.
I did. You know, I tend to be a host. I host a lot. Even if I'm not hosting, I'll go to someone's house and bring something special. And there's a little bit of fun that I have with taking drinks and, making them my own. So same with this story.
So when you first read Bird by Bird, was it a Gigi Rita filled night?
So I first read Bird by Bird in 2018. This actually is not the first book by Anne Lamott I read. The first book that I read was Small Victories, Spotting Impossible Moments of Grace.
Did that lead you to this book? Or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I was at a point in my life where I don't know if it was a personal for me or if it's just, you think about like children have developmental phases, and I wonder sometimes as adults we all have developmental phases where, I was in my mid-30s at the time. I was starting to, just question things about, like, it wasn't quite midlife crisis or anything, but it was sort of coming to terms with thoughts that I'd always had, and who am I? What kind of person do I want to be going forward? And I'd always heard about Bird by Bird. She has another book about raising her son as a single mom. So I'd heard things about her from people that I looked up to for a long time. And then like I said, I read Small Victories, and then I came up and I decided to read Bird by Bird next. And it was, I think I wrote down my note after reading the first book, Small Victories, that Lamott's writing made me want to be braver, more resilient, and more at peace with the beautiful and heartbreaking experience it is to be human.
Well, and this is a book that I think, one, the lack of Larry Bird in it was affected me greatly. It seems like a missed opportunity for him on an autobiography.
Yeah.
But I think it's hard. I know one of your questions is, what do we know about the author?
Yeah.
This book is intrinsically intertwined with the author. So I think it may make sense to just kind of jump ahead a bit in your questioning and ask, who is Anne Lamott?
Yeah, absolutely. Anne Lamott, let's see. She's a baby boomer. I know that. She's also a writer, but so Bird by Bird came about because she'd been teaching writing for about 10 years at this time. And this book came out in the early 90s. And it was a summary of all the things that she taught her writing students, where she taught, I don't know exactly, but I think it's somewhere north of San Francisco in California. And so this was a book about writing, essentially. And so, yeah, this book was on her talking to her students about the process of writing and what it is. It came out after Operating Instructions, which is the one I mentioned earlier about her experience raising her son as a single mom. Also, the phrase Bird by Bird it comes from an early part of the book where she's remembering a story that her younger brother had to do a writing assignment, and he had waited like to the very last minute, as kids do, and his dad was sitting and he was freaking out, and his dad was just like, buddy, and the project was on birds, and so his dad was just like, buddy, you just got to take it bird by bird. So he sat, and that's sort of like a piece of advice that she gives her students, is like just to take like baby steps or small steps with everything. Of course, the way that she writes that's so special is that she's so self-deprecating, and she's so funny, and she's so dry as well, and she'll like, just throw out amazing advice to you, but then, the next moment she's making fun of herself or making fun of everyone, and that's what's really amazing about her writing.
Yeah, in preparation for this, I listened to the audiobook read by Anne Lamott to prepare, and
Yeah.
the self-deprecating nature of it was pretty good. The amount of references to doing lines of cocaine for such a lady who was very Christian it was interesting. One thing that I was surprised by was, you read it a few years ago, and then it was on Ted Lasso where he's like bird by bird, and I was like, this is a more recent book, and come to find out, it's 30 years old. Like this month, it's 30 years old this month.
Okay.
And that was something that kind of I found interesting in the reading of it, because there are some parts where I believe in 1994, Anne Lamott was a very progressive, forward-thinking person, and it's kind of a time capsule, because there are a few parts where I'm like, ooh, easy there, Anne, but never too far.
Yeah.
But it kind of shows you like things change as time goes on, and the world changes, and what's progressive one day maybe it's still progressive today, but maybe has some moments of pause where you have to kind of take in, like, this is from that time.
Yeah, it is, like you said, is written 30 years ago. Well, it is a while ago, and we've also had a lot of cultural changes, specifically in like the last 15 years, I would say. Um, our cat is really
I'm gonna
struggling.
just give her a treat.
Okay, our cat's really struggling with both of us being in a confined space.
In most cat relationships, I think there's human and spare human, and I think for us it's human A, human B, and the lack of access to either.
Yeah.
Is excruciating.
Human C is also available, but she is 9. It's not
and a bit of a wild card.
But you brought up her doing drugs and cocaine, and that is definitely a big part of her writing and her personality, is that she is in recovery. I think she's very active in AA recovery specifically, and has been doing that, I think, as long as she's been writing, so over 30 years. But yeah, but she'll very honestly talk about her experience doing drugs and how, getting to a really low point in her life. And I mean, that is part of the beauty of her writing, is her honesty around things that, some people would rather take to the grave.
I think a prevailing theme I took from reading is writing, one, is a therapeutic tool. And for her, and what she promotes in the writing classes, really is the catharsis of writing and the ability to work through, whether through characters or for yourself, but also to build up a skill set for yourself too, that you can carry the rest of your life. I say all that not being a writer. What did you feel was a primary vibe or tone for the book? It is a book about writing, right?
Right.
But how did you feel that affected the tone or vibe of the book?
Well, like I said already, it is a funny book. It is very dry. She's writing to her students essentially, And she's basically like talking about how they want to all get published. And that's the thing that they're focusing on. And she's really trying to encourage them to just enjoy the process of writing. But I would say, like, insert creative process for writing. That's her particular art. But I think what she says applies to every creative process. I mean, part of the reason I wanted to talk about it today is from what I've learned from doing this podcast, which there is a small amount of writing involved, but it isn't just writing. It's creative. It's getting in touch with myself. I mean, she says in the book that, you know, you think you want the tea service for the caffeine, but sometimes you actually need the tea service itself. And I've found so many surprises through creative process, through doing this podcast. I would say everybody needs to listen and edit themselves. Everyone needs to go through the experience of listening to themselves talk and hearing and not just when you say too much, but also just not. Sometimes I've listened to myself and I'm like, oh my gosh, you weren't even like listening to that person. You were just ready to say the next thing. And there's something very helpful if you're willing to take the criticism. And so that's something, like I was saying, that I would not have picked up at all when I started this, you know, this journey or whatever you want to say that I'm on right now. But it's been really eye-opening.
One thing I thought was fascinating, not on your question list here, we're throwing curveballs.
Okay.
She spends a lot of time talking about the little stories that kind of make up, I don't want to say make up your life. I'm adding that in. She doesn't say that. But the little stories that could be engaged to build up this writing skill set, right? And what was that something that came across to you? Did you have a thought process associated with how she asked people to just write about the mundane, write about your morning, write about your...
To think about that for a second. I don't know. That wasn't, I don't think that really shocked me at all. Like, that wasn't something that I found unusual. Feel that that is life, is those
Right.
mundane little pieces of your life, and that's what makes.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what's striking for me because I would say it's the first book I've read where someone lays it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's, I think it's a common thing a lot of us know we don't talk about, where it's not only, you know, life is made up of the minutia, right? It is made up of these tiny little things that aggregate. You know, I went to get coffee and I got frustrated and I came to work and I yelled at somebody and then I realized, hey, I'm a monster, I need to chill out. And then I had a really good engagement. And she does spend a decent amount of time talking about, write about those moments, write about what
Mm-hmm.
makes up your life. And it kind of crosses over because she asks you to think about the characters in the same way. If you're writing something that is fiction, who did they yell at the coffee shop? Did they not yell at all? Did they high five the barista?
Mm-hmm. Are you yelling at coffee shops often?
All the time. I'm banned from so many coffee shops. No, I
Not
actually,
true.
actually, I would say, like, you know, growing up, I wanted to like, dates me a little bit. I wanted to have a Cheers where you walk in and everybody knows
Yeah,
you.
and it definitely dates you because you weren't even born when that show came
I
on.
was born while it was on. I recall its last episode. I might have been 8. Uh, but, I mean, for me, yeah, coffee shops are actually like my Cheers. That's the most likely I'll go to for someone to know me.
Okay.
This episode will have this portion cut, likely, because it's not about me.
We'll see. Yeah, and that's
But,
another thing I will say. But hold on. I was going to this process of things you don't know. You don't understand editing until you actually have to sit down and listen to a story from front to beginning to end,
bird by
and
bird.
bird by bird. And then all of a sudden you realize that there's magic in conversation, but it's about finding which branches need to be pruned and which branches really stick with the conversation. But that wasn't, I was like going back to the quote about the tea service, thought I was getting caffeine, and actually it was the experience itself that has had a bigger impact on me. I really, that really definitely resonated with me. And I think when I was wondering about what I was going to talk about on this, me being pretty open and vulnerable here about my experience in the last years. And I mean, like I said, it started in 2018. Who was I then? She, I think a pretty epic part or a pretty notable part of this story is the quote unquote, and forgive me, readers, a little language, but it's the shitty first draft. Mm-hmm. And her talking about what you're saying, putting down the mundane, just write, and shitty first draft. I'll call it SFD going forward. But writing that and knowing it's not going to be great and not expecting it to be great. And even wonderful writers and wonderful creators, they don't sit down and create perfection initially. It is a process. It's a process of going through all that. And that really spoke to me at the time because I am a person that struggles with perfectionism. And perfectionism it's a defense, right? It's thinking, well, no one can criticize me or no one can reject me if I always do everything perfectly. But the problem with it too is that it works. That you're not perfect. It's like almost like a mental thing in your head. You think, if I do X, Y, Z, if I do it just this way, if I hit it just right, I won't experience pain and suffering. And so in this book, she talks about the shitty first drafts, but then the next chapter after that, it's called perfectionism. And this, I think, was something that was really important that hit me when I first read this. So this is the opening paragraph of the chapter Perfectionism. Perfectionism is the voice of the oppressor, the enemy of the people. It will keep you cramped and insane your whole life, and it is the main obstacle between you and a shitty first draft. I think perfectionism is based on the obsessive belief that if you can run carefully enough, hitting each stepping stone just right, you won't have to die. The truth is that you will die anyway, and a lot of people who aren't even looking at their feet are going to do it a whole lot better than you and have way more fun while they're doing it. So, and then she goes on, besides, perfectionism will ruin your writing, blocking inventiveness and playfulness and life forces. And this is classic Anne Lamott. She says, these are words we are allowed to use in California.
Yeah, like we could all sit here and lament all the things we didn't do, but those are just lives we didn't live.
Yeah.
And they're no better or no worse.
Right.
And she has such a good grasp of that, like one of the things I did enjoy listening to her kind of go over some of, again, the minutia stuff, because it's like, it's comforting. It sounded like a like-minded friend that you're talking to. And then occasionally she'd be like, and then I got drunk for a week and woke up on this couch and took a line of cocaine.
In fairness to her, I think those happen a few times in the story. It is, and it's all references to prior situations.
Yeah, we should also mention, I finished it today, which is where the most of the cocaine references take place is towards the end of the book.
Okay, good to know.
Fresh in my head.
Okay. So I also feel like she talks a lot about using humor to fit in as a kid, because she was someone that felt ostracized, and she had a similar situation to something that I experienced. I was homeschooled pretty much 2nd through 7th grade, and I was so, for lack of a better word, I was so thirsty to fit in. I wanted friends so badly that, like, frankly, as you know, it was cringe.
bit sus, but mainly cringe.
I was probably a little cringe, and along the way did find great friends. But she tells the story of there was some writing prompt, and I think when she was in 7th grade, and she like hit a home run. It was hilarious, and then all of a sudden the kids were accepting of her, and that's something I had a very similar experience. I can't remember exactly the story, but it was basically I did a retelling of Cinderella, and I remember like everyone laughing, and it was that moment of like, finally I did it. And I remember someone just being like, I didn't know you were funny. And then it is something that if you are not funny, then congratulations. You were you never had to like do things extra to make people like you. But I think something that if you ever have a friend in your life who is good at humor and is funny, they have gone through some really shitty moments, I can guarantee you.
Well, I'm glad via recording this, we've now documented the 2 times in history friends were made through a writing prompt. At the elementary school age.
Middle school.
Middle school age.
Me and Lamott, we have something in common.
I'm just envisioning some like middle schooler walking up, Gigi, banger, writing prompt.
Did it again.
No, did it for the first time.
Right.
Oh man, the heft of expectation after that.
Yeah, well it's tough. You got to keep it going, but I did. I kept those kids laughing for years, and the teachers hated it.
I do want to hit on, this is a book about writing. When you first told me that you were going to do Bird by Bird, I've already used the joke, I'll redo it. I'm like, yes, an autobiography of Larry Bird.
Uh-huh.
And you're like, no, it's about writing. And I was, as not an avid writer, I would say all of my writing has been primarily academic or for internal use at an agency. I was like, great, ready for this snooze fest. But again, enjoyed the book. Would you say this is a genre you gravitate towards, books about writing? And are these all secretly decent books? And it's like coded for the library community. It's like, here's a book about writing that'll totally change your life.
No, first to clarify, I don't think I gravitate towards books on writing. There is a part of me that would love to write. There is another part of me that is extremely extroverted. Part of the reason I picked this medium is because it allows me to talk to other people. And that is, the desire to be talking 70% of the day does interfere with the writing.
I've never heard you summed up so succinctly.
Well, I'm glad. It's a little self-awareness here.
I love it. I married it.
Okay. Yeah, so I will read books on writing just because there's a thing you might not be aware of in librarianship is at least
shots. Okay.
Okay.
Come at me. What is this thing I don't know?
Well, just because you wouldn't be going in for interviews, but when I first got into librarianship, they were very cautionary about saying, why do you want to be a librarian? Why do you want to work here? And they were like, do not say it's because you love books. Don't say that. And at this point, I would beg to differ. I love books. I love authors. I think they're so interesting. I should not elevate them. They are just human beings. But there's something about that medium that I just find like the sexiest of all.
Oh my.
I mean that in just like it's just so alluring to me. I find it like so interesting. So yeah, I would definitely say I veer towards books about writing just for that reason. I have read Stephen King's On Writing. That's another one that I really enjoy. But specifically, do I go to this genre? And I would say Anne Lamott is her own kind of genre. I would compare her almost to like a David Sedaris.
Okay.
I think they're, forgive me, either one if you're not close in age, but I feel like you're close in age. And they are tell life stories very honestly, but with a really like interesting dry humor that I love. So that's when I say I read books like this. Yes, I read a lot of David Sedaris
Yeah.
and I read a lot of Anne Lamott.
Yeah, I would say, to hit a few things that you discussed there, I could see the similarity to David Sedaris and the candid honesty. She's not as funny as David
Oh
Sedaris.
my gosh, no.
However, but
This is the only book you've read. You haven't read the other ones.
I get the vibe. No, you're right. I have not. I can't say that for sure. But where I was going to say is you. She seems to be a person open to growth in her self-deprecation. Not to say David Sedaris is, but he doesn't quite. In the books I've read from David Sedaris, doesn't quite chart the path of growth. Where she's really willing to just kind of get in the mud and be like, "Yeah, I kind of sucked during that."
Yeah.
And I think that's probably it's one of those things, where she's very open and honest about things she's had to grow with because she's writing about it and then having to kind of reconcile it later. Where, we grew up in that period where the whole world wasn't recording all of the worst parts of our life. And, I thought about this a little bit after reading it, where it was like, the parts where I'm like, oh, that's a little cringy. I'm like, man, did I say worse things when I was a kid?
Yeah.
And probably did,
Yeah.
and would not like to be judged the remainder of my life on
Right.
those things.
Right.
Because we don't like people in their growth. We want them either fully cooked when we interact with them or to just write them off, right? And with Anne Lamott, you get the whole shebang, right? You get the messiness, you get the growth, and that came through. David Sedaris, the man, that's a funny dude. That's rare air to be putting her in that category.
I find them equally funny. I remember she is often like subtly very salty with other people.
Yes.
And after I read the first book, Small Victories, there's someone she referenced in there that's like a writer that's kind of like in her lane and that she calls their nemesis. And I was like, I feel like she and David Sedaris are so similar. And then I was like, oh, what if he's the nemesis? Well,
Oh my
I
God.
highly doubt it. I mean, she's also very Christian, very liberal Christian.
Which she references in the book, but is not a book about that. And I like that she's not heavy-handed with that feature of the book, because it can be, now all of a sudden I'm for a certain group, right? And I feel like there's a very universal feel. I don't know. Did you feel like it's just anyone of any faith could identify with her connections?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I was about to say a lot of people, probably not a lot of people, but like I can probably reference a handful of people, not all Christian. I also want to point out I have given this book to conservative Christians, and she's very liberal, and they also enjoyed it. So I don't feel like she pigeonholes just one narrow point of view. I think anybody can understand where you don't have to agree with her, but at least you understand where she's coming from. But yeah, in her other books there are a lot more references about tenets of faith. Like I said, the subtitle to the Small Victories is Spotting Impossible Moments of Grace. Her latest one is Somehow Notes on Love, and they're much more spiritual, I would say, than this book.
So another question related to the genre. Are books on writing considered a genre?
I don't think so, right? I mean, from
Right.
my librarian perspective, it would be, what, the 808s? Oh my gosh, some librarian is judging me, but like in the Dewey Decimal, it's like, I think it's 808.
And shout out to the 808 area code.
What is that, Chicago from the Kanye albums?
I no idea.
808s and Heartbreaks.
Oh no, 808 and Heartbreak for our listeners was a machine used to make beats in the 80s and 90s that was very popular. Now has fallen out of fashion.
I thought it was an area code.
And for the people listening to that and saying, my God, it's not that at all, you're welcome to that. This is me sitting in the messiness of not knowing exactly what an 808 is. It's a production. Hawaii. Shout out to Hawaii and the 808.
Oh, okay.
Libration Nation in Hawaii. This one's for you.
We love you guys. You're the best. Invite us. We'll come record out there.
Might need some help with the tickets.
Yeah, but a place to stay is great. So yeah, I wouldn't say writing as a particular genre. I mean, it's also I don't want to call this like self-help or anything at all. I think there's good tips.
I would say, and I can't recall if she talks about going to therapy, but she is active in a recovery community. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be a lot of the things she discusses in the insight are therapeutic tools. I've said that several times to the point where it's probably obnoxious, but she does engage in a lot of things that would help you get through tough times, embrace the good times. Yeah, so, there is a self-helpish aspect of it. I thought, and one thing I wanted to ask you about, she really leans in on the activity of writing as a type of catharsis and a way to process your emotions and engagement in the world. And do you feel like that's something that other writers would ascribe to? Because I was thinking, I don't know if a fantasy or sci-fi author would view it that way, other than maybe a level of escapism. But I don't know. I hope a horror writer is not viewing it that way.
I definitely think, you said horror. Stephen King, that man, he understands himself. He understands his worldview. I think that he's very good at character development and world building within those stories. And I think that's probably where the catharsis comes for him. I can't speak for Mr. King. Not yet. Maybe someday.
I hope not. That'd be a weird turn for our lives, to be hanging out with Stephen King and you speak for him.
I would love to hang out with Stephen King. I can't say for sure because I'm not a writer, and I definitely would not be writing. If I was writing, I probably would not be writing sci-fi or horror. One thing that I've heard often, like I said, I sort of idolize writers sometimes, so I like to listen to their process. And I think she talks about it in this book, and other writers have talked about it as well, is the fact that these characters are already alive basically in the minds of their creators. And it's up to the creator, it's up to the writer to let them tell their story. And I have the episode that's coming out this week. I was just editing it, and I was listening to, I had just listened to a podcast about this author talking about the fact that she took one teeny little piece of information about this character and just started writing, and all of a sudden the character came through. Where they're born, what their parents are like, what their personality is like, who they met, all of these things. And that to me is one that I think that's the magic in it that I'm so drawn to with writing, with books. And I think that's probably where a lot of the catharsis comes from. But you have to sit down and do it. You have to sit down, take it bird by bird.
So one of the things you mentioned earlier was the, maybe you didn't mention it, the feel I got was talking about the immersion of a book. And I do like books and I like movies because there is a level of sensory deprivation. I'm living somewhere else. I like going to the movies in the darkness and seeing it. And with a book, the world kind of disappears a little bit. So, with that though, I mean, I think you could probably read this book and be more inspired to write. I think what she did for me, as someone who likes that immersion, it actually changed how I viewed appreciating the genre. Because she talks about ways to be a better reader as well. And so I always kind of view it in a dichotomy. I know it's a book on writing, but it's also a bit of a book on reading. And did you kind of get that vibe? Do you feel like that's a common theme that people might get where their walk away of, I'm going to read this in a different fashion. I'm going to appreciate this in a different way.
I feel, and like I said, I'm not a writer at all.
So you say you're not a writer at all. I don't know if that's legitimately fair, and I believe our cat little lady would agree with that.
Also, Bill is the Dr. Doolittle of the house, so the cat is squarely on his lap. But that's okay. Hey, girl, you're
Do
now
not chew.
touching the
Do not
mic.
chew.
Do not
Chew the
touch
mic
the
cable.
mic. Like I said already, I wish I did more writing. I feel that you can't be a good writer if you are not a reader. I'm sorry, there's just too much amazing writing out there to take in, and for someone not to be inspired by that and to not grow from it, to me it would be impossible not to do both. And I'm often inspired by things I read and people I read. And I think that also, I want to point out another reason this really clicks with me is she talks about so much about her love of books and reading, and also like just her family and how she grew up, and they would have authors over all the time. And to me, that's how I feel about it, is there's so much magic within literature. And I can't imagine someone being a great writer without being a great reader as well.
Yeah, and again, I thought for me as someone who's does not view themselves as a writer, which this will be hilarious after my ninth Pulitzer 20 years from now. Don't view myself as a writer, but there was a lot I could take away just from reading it. One, about just, the human condition and processing your thoughts, but two, a lot of insight on how to better appreciate a book, especially in the middle chapters.
I think maybe it's a good time. I wanted to make sure I got this in because it's so inspiring to me. And once again, this is her talking to her students, essentially, is a lot of this book of passing down what she knows outside of her class. And this is the very last paragraph of the entire book. It says, she asks, or the students ask, "So why does our writing matter again?" They ask. "Because of the spirit, I say, because of the heart. Writing and reading decrease our sense of isolation. They deepen and widen and expand our sense of life. They feed the soul. When writers make us shake our heads with the exactness of their prose and their truths, and even make us laugh about ourselves or life, our buoyancy is restored. We are given a shot at dancing with, or at least clapping along with, of course I'm going to cry, the absurdity of life, instead of being squashed by it over and over again. It's like singing on a boat during a terrible storm at sea. You can't stop the raging storm, but singing can change the hearts and spirits of the people who are together on that ship." And I feel like that's just such and this, cry so easily.
Mainly at commercials. But
I mean, really almost anything, but
that is a powerful passage, yes.
yeah, it's very powerful, and I feel like that is the experience of, being human.
Feels wrong to now ask. Who, other than your husband, and your father, who would you recommend this book to?
Uh, um, Obviously to people who want to write, but I think anyone that's interested in the creative process, it doesn't have to, you can replace writing with sitting down and working on your art and your creativity. Yeah, so people who are interested in creativity, writing specifically, but really anything. Also, as you can pick out what I just said, is anyone who loves books and reading and just learning, like people like me who fangirl authors, and someone who's maybe wanting to grow spiritually. I mean, as you said earlier, there are connections between David Sedaris and Anne Lamott, but I think Anne Lamott is definitely someone who is open to growth. Sorry, we're all both laughing now because the cat is just really living it
The
up.
low rumble with occasional high pitch
Uh-huh.
coming from my mic is because the cat is very comfortable.
She's very happy. Yeah, I love this book so much. It was so helpful and for me to kind of identify the type of person who I am or who I want to be and the things I love. There's one more thing that we didn't touch on, and you brought it up earlier with her cringiness.
She's not incredibly problematic, but she grows and owns it, right?
She does,
Right?
but did you know that she pretty much got canceled a few years ago? Did you know about this?
You'd be shocked how little I know about Anne Lamott.
Yeah, so I reference her a lot as someone I look up to, and I do want to be clear about the fact that she said some really, we'll just say terrible things in trying to make a joke about a very famous trans person. And it did not go over well. She kind of doubled down. This is tweeting.
Is this still tweeting?
Hmm?
Is it still tweeting? Is it Xing?
Who cares?
I don't know. Well,
I'll
she
probably
she
get
definitely
shamed.
should not.
She should, but I think
Threadsing?
yeah. I wanted to bring this up because it was what she said was egregious, and she made fun of Caitlyn Jenner, and made fun of them specifically with their sexuality and gender, I guess, and I think I think Anne Lamott was more upset about their politics or her politics, but the long story short is she got called out on it. She was mortified. She did everything she could to try to make it better. So I recently read Somehow Notes on Love where she details this. I actually didn't know about it until I read the book. And I obviously don't agree with what she said, but I do feel like we need to be in a place where there's more dialogue, where there's grace around people making mistakes, especially if they're trying to learn and get better and they're asking for forgiveness. She didn't even overall get canceled. I mean, she's still writing. She still has a lot of fans. But reading her side of the story, I felt like yes, she shouldn't have said that. She needed to kind of go down, and she did shame spiral and guilt spiral, and I wouldn't want that for anybody, but you kind of have to do some of that to learn. And anyway, I just thought I didn't know if you even knew that, and you were talking about how cringe she was. And
No, I won't go through. I had a small list I made. There are some references she makes in the book, and which is what led me to look at when the book came out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things she says in the book, they're passive. They're not outright aggressive. And it made me think of like my own dialogues as a kid and growing up and as a teenager, and you say things about certain like groups
Mm-hmm.
because they're not like real to you, like it's something that's kind of in the water that people say, and it's on shows even in pop culture. And then you realize as you grow older, oh, this does not work. And she was making those things at the time when those probably would have been acceptable commentary and jokes in 1994. But she has those, and as she often is giving grace to other people, I try to give her the same grace in that, especially as hearing, the wrestling that she does with many other things. I assumed, hey, in the 30 years, maybe someone took her to the mat on this or that.
Yeah.
So I was not aware of that interaction. But, I do think there is a bit of a, trigger warning for, there is some passive comments, not really intended to do harm, that could do harm, for certain people. Not the trans community, though. So.
Yeah, I don't remember those comments from the books, but
yeah, mainly for the intellectually disabled or developmentally disabled community. Okay. There are some disparaging comments that I would certainly hope she would not make today.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of also, there's another kind of calling in or coming to terms with the fact that some books are being rewritten now. Roald Dahl specifically, and he's been dead for a while. And so there's questions about rewriting history. Should Anne Lamott go back and take those comments out of the book? Judy Blume has notably updated Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, to include feminine products that girls today are using. And it was because that was one that I was like, that makes sense, because I read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And even when I was reading it, the products that were originally referenced, I was so confused.
Yeah, given what a formative book that is, it makes sense. Roald Dahl, it's like, what are you rewriting? Because he's already had some pretty questionable books out there. His omnibus, it's like, man, when you weren't writing about giant fruits and vegetables, you were getting weird.
Yeah. So it is it calls into question, do we redo all these things? Do we let them stand? What is the next generation going to think? So we're at definitely a turning point with that in particular. I don't know I think if I know Anne Lamott, I think she's probably going to let her stuff stand and just say, whoops, messed up there. Could have done better there. That's basically the type of person she is.
I feel like Anne Lamott would sit in it more. I mean, by the end of the book of Bird by Bird, you do get the sensation if confronted with an issue, she would sit in it and come maybe to a different conclusion, or I don't know.
Yeah, so we don't know for sure,
but probably.
Yeah,
she would definitely give her a.
Yeah. Her books were there for me at a moment that I really needed some, I don't want to say direction, but just someone to sit there and be human. And I loved it so much, and that was sort of the reason I picked it. I guess since we already brought it up, my original choice was going to be Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, which is also a huge formative book for me. And I mean, it's the formative book, I guess. But anyway, we decided this was probably a little bit.
Not talking to your husband about that book. Probably.
We didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable.
Namely myself.
Namely you.
I mean, I think I'd be here for it, but it was also, I think that's a book for, another new friend.
Yeah. Maybe we'll cover that with somebody else. But if anyone wants to come on here and talk about Judy Blume, just know the door is open. Come in.
Namely Judy Blume. If you would like to come on here and talk about Judy Blume. One question.
Uh-huh.
Is pairing a GigiRita with a person who's been in AA for over 30 years.
Uh-huh.
Something we need to apologize for, take ownership for, and really think through.
Well, I would say then I would have to rethink the whole drinks in the library concept.
I think not rethinking the concept, but it's for all enjoyment. I don't think Anne would have a problem with it.
No. And somehow the book that just came out, she talks about like they're thinking about buying beers for people. Like I don't think that she has a problem with other people drinking alcohol.
Yeah.
Clearly she's concerned about people who have addiction issues, but
it's not referenced in this book that I'm aware of.
No, but I've read other books by her, and she's definitely not. I don't think that she's judgy at all, and I don't think she would have a problem. I did think about that, honestly, because I know she's sober. So I wanted to keep true to myself and keep true to the show, and I didn't feel like it was disrespecting this person that I care about. So anyway. Thank you for asking the question, though, in case anyone is worried about it.
Well, Liberation Nation, I hopefully did not disappoint as your guest host. And hopefully the beautiful, kind editor of the show will take out the most cringy parts of my discussion with the wonderful Gigi. And
thank you so much for being willing to do this and coming back on, and we're trying something new. We're trying something a little different.
You know, normally we're in such simpatico. I was trying to tee you up to give your parting line.
Until next time, cheers.
Thank you for spending some time with me and my guest for an episode of Drinks in the Library. For more information about the show, you can find us on Instagram at Drinks in the Library, on the World Wide Web, drinksinthelibrary.com, or shoot me an email at drinkspod@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.